Welcome to the How We Get Through podcast, where we share stories, mental health insights, and healing advice on life's everyday challenges. I'm your host, Jen, a licensed therapist and founder of the How We Get Through app. Today's guest is Kristen Jacobson, a licensed psychotherapist in Chicago. You know that voice inside your head that says, "You're not good enough"? Yep, that's imposter syndrome. And Kristen is here to help us get rid of those relentless thoughts and feelings. Listen in as we explore the psychology behind imposter syndrome and swap stories, so you know you're not alone in this. All right, welcome to the How We Get Through podcast. Today's guest is Kristen Jacobson. She's a licensed psychotherapist in the Chicago area and an adjunct professor of psychology at the National Louis University. She has been working in the field since 2009 and established her own therapy practice in 2013. Kristen specializes in working with clients who struggle with anxiety and perfectionism. And baller, she is licensed in 3 other states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Florida. Hey, Kristen, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yes, so exciting. So we like to open up every podcast episode with a mental health myth. So this could be something that you have heard from other clients or something that you've thought of before you went into the field. So we would love to know what your mental health myth is.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this a little bit before coming on the show. And I think one thing that I tend to hear from a lot of people is this perception that mental health conditions are rare and always severe. And I think that deters a lot of people from seeking out therapy or, any other mental health resources because there's sort of this stigma around mental health issues and what they look like. And, we've seen them portrayed in the movies and things like that, which can be accurate, but oftentimes, it's dramatized. And so, yeah, I think just the myth being that this is how mental health presents itself, and these are the only people who could benefit from therapy or services.
Yes, I love that. Like, you have to be so messed up to go to therapy, right?
Right.
But actually, if you are well adjusted and have a lot of capacity, you can do a lot of healing. You can do a lot more understanding of yourself and kind of, just knowing yourself a little bit more. You don't need to have all of the trauma or the big stuff to do therapy.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of times, if someone's in crisis, we can't even get to the really deep stuff anyway, because it's a lot of all right, how do we cope with what's going on right now?
Yes. I love that. So that's something to remember, right? When you're in crisis, it's all about regulation, right?
Yeah.
It's all about getting you to a certain point where you can then start to unravel things. So if you are in crisis, obviously, please come get therapy and support help. And even if you're not in crisis, you still can really benefit from therapy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Kristen, well, let us know. So we kind of met, I would say organically, but through a little app called Instagram. So I was doing stuff about the app and Kristen reached out, and she has been a dream to work with and just a great, great therapist. So for me, I just want to say I really appreciate you. But for everyone
Thank
else,
you.
I would love to know what your journey has been in getting into the mental health field.
Yeah. So I initially went to college to actually teach elementary school. And then I kind of changed course. So I took an abnormal psychology class, and it just kind of blew my mind. And I realized, so I had to have a second major anyway with my education degree, but realized I wanted to go into psychology, and then went on to get my master's in counseling psychology and worked in more, I would say, acute settings. So did a lot of crisis assessments, and I worked on the inpatient unit at a hospital and stuff when I was starting out in the field, and then opened my practice in 2013. And then I've been teaching for about 5 years. So it sort of came full circle when I actually taught abnormal psychology, and That was the class that really got me interested in the field. So I started out working more with kids and teens, and am now pretty much exclusively working with adults.
Mm-hmm. And what was your deciding factor in that? Like, did you always wanted to work with adults, or did you feel like you just started out, like, when your internship, it's like you try everything. And so did you find yourself in teens and like wanting to do adults in that way, or?
So I actually wanted to go into forensics, and I had an internship.
Yes.
Yeah. Now having my own children, I don't think that would have been a good path for me. But I did an internship at a juvenile detention center. So that's when I originally wanted to work with adults, did this internship, really enjoyed the teens, kind of went in that direction. And then it's just really hard to have a caseload of just kids and teens because there's a lot of family dynamics at play too. So I think I just kind of got burnt out of that population being so specific. And I tended to draw a lot of young adults who were sort of experiencing high functioning anxiety, perfectionism, some comorbid depression, things like that. And I really enjoyed working with that population. And so that kind of became my niche.
Yes, I love that. And can you talk a little bit, like you mentioned, now that I have children, I feel like forensic wouldn't be the best choice. Mm-hmm. I would love for you to kind of dive deeper into that, because as therapists, we have to take care of our own mental health, and emotional boundaries and all of that. And so what is that for you, and why was that a good move for you looking back?
I think since having kids, things that didn't really used to bother me because of having had so much experience working in like crisis situations and hearing horrible stories. I mean, I was calling the Department of Child and Family Services on a weekly basis. So when I was working in the hospital, so you kind of have to get desensitized to that in a way in order to keep doing your job effectively. And I didn't have kids at the time, whereas now I think hearing about some of those traumatic things that children go through, now having, and their parents, now having my own children, it really hits me a lot deeper. And I think that sort of compassion fatigue, or the inability to sort of compartmentalize those things and do my job well, would have interfered a lot more after having kids.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess too, it's the opportunity we give ourselves to pivot when things don't feel like they align with us anymore, right? Yeah. This like idea that we get to grow important. And evolve. And I think especially after having kids, like you do change a lot. Your priorities change, your values change. And it is kind of this rebalancing of like, what do I want my life to look like?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we have kids around the same age, right? How old are your kids?
Yeah, 2.5 and 5. So.
Yes.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Just turned 3 and almost 5.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah.
Nice.
We deep in it, girl.
Indeed.
Deep in it. Yes. Oh my gosh, I love it. So, as far as the How We Get Through app, you have developed a course on imposter syndrome. And I would love for you to talk about why you kind of landed on imposter syndrome, and where are you really seeing your clients struggle with this, and give us some ideas of like, how do we know if we have imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of I'll call it a condition. It's not a diagnosis, but it's a condition that I think is becoming more common. More people are sort of getting familiar with that terminology as of late, and something I've definitely encountered myself. I think I was just sort of reflecting back about when I think it kind of started for me. And for me, I think it was in college. Like I went from being one of the sort of top students in my high school graduating class to then the very humbling experience of going to a competitive college where I was like definitely not near the top. And it was like, oh, okay, I need to work hard, and I don't know that I'm quite as smart as these other people. And so it was just kind of an eye-opening experience for me. And I've seen it shown up in my work as well, as both a therapist and a professor. And in terms of my clients, I think, I'll have these clients who come to me because they've been so successful in their careers. And, they're just sort of reaching their goals left and right, but they're not happy. They're not content, and they're just extremely stressed out and feel like they're really over functioning. They feel like they have to keep doing more and more and more in order to maintain that success. And so I think that that's just not sustainable, and that becomes really problematic. And a lot of that is rooted in this imposter syndrome, where they feel like they maybe aren't as competent or as smart as their peers. And so they have to do more work or say yes to everything and not have those healthy boundaries, and are working till all hours of the night. And it is more common in women, but I see it in my male clients too, where we're talking people who are high up at companies that are like have a ton of self-doubt.
Yeah. And do you think there's any correlation with that, of like having such a high, I guess, visible job where there feels like you have to be at a certain level, or people perceive you to be at a certain level? Like, do you feel like imposter syndrome gets greater in those higher positions?
Oh, that's a good question. I think anyone can really experience it. I think a big component of it is that external validation. So if you're in a profession, or your job title is one where you are getting a lot of acknowledgement and a lot of external validation, I think that can be sort of like a double-edged sword, because of course it feels great, but then you're constantly chasing that. I have a client right now who's an attorney. She's on track to make partner, and is really experiencing that, has kind of gotten into this trap of wanting that external validation.
Yeah. Especially if there's a big goal at the end of it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like make or break, or that's what it feels like anyway.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah. So. And I'm wondering too, as you're talking, like even companies that have like bonuses, or you have to hit your, like, I don't know, guys, I've never worked corporate. I've never been in the corporate world. So it's just so interesting. I'm like, I think like I've heard from some of my friends, like, there's just a lot of meetings that you got to go to. But there's certain expectations, I think. I'm thinking one of my friends who has worked for this recruiting company like since out of college, and like hitting your bonuses and all the trips to Mexico and all the things. And it gets to a point where she can do it, right? But there is that, like, is this actual happiness for me? Is this fulfilling for me? Or is there something more? And so I think these are all kind of aspects of leading to imposter syndrome, which also kind of gets a little bit in perfectionism, right?
Oh, yeah. That's a big component of it.
Yeah.
Right.
And then I'm curious, do you have any personal connection with perfectionism, or feel like how does perfectionism kind of like originate? Like what would you say is like some factors that can kind of contribute to that?
Yeah. I'm sort of a recovering perfectionist. And it can stem from a lot of different root causes, some of them societal and just kind of how we're raised. In fact, a lot of that right now, just with social media and stuff, I think like in whatever we do, whether it's parenting or our job or whatever, we kind of feel like we have to excel in all of these different areas and be quote unquote perfect, the perfect parent, the perfect employee or whatever. and it's unrealistic. And so I think this is it usually starts, when we're younger, and again, kind of going back to that external validation piece, like maybe we received a lot of that growing up, and that felt good, and so we're chasing that, or maybe maybe there wasn't more of that sort of emotional connection of like you have worth for who you are, not for what you can do, and so I
say
think
that again. Say that again.
Yeah, a lot. And I think especially in the US, a lot of our work tends to be focused on what we can do, and not who we are. And so that becomes how we measure ourselves. And so we want what we do to be perfect, because that's going to get that validation from other people. And it's just kind of this vicious cycle.
Yeah. Oof, that's so good. It's so good. So perfectionism is kind of where it originates from, essentially. And then we can find ourselves in job positions, or even in parenting, or in friendships, like in other relationships, right? Where you start to feel not good enough, or you need to do more or be more. Can you talk about how that would show up in like a friendship or relationship way? Like what would be something that somebody would do? Like what are the signs that you're doing that in your relationships?
Probably putting other people's needs before your own, but all the time. I mean, obviously we need to be a good partner. We need to be a good friend and have that reciprocity, and, be there for the people who are important to us. But if we do it at the expense of our own needs, then that we don't trust the relationship for what it is. We think the relationship is based on what we can do for that person. And so we feel like we have to keep doing more and keep that pace going, as opposed to healthy relationships are very, very balanced and reciprocal in that way. So a lot of perfectionists are people pleasers. They don't have great boundaries in terms of, saying no to commitments that maybe they don't necessarily want to do, things like that.
Wow. That's so good. That is so good. So if you're finding yourself in a relationship where you are meeting the needs of someone else more than them meeting your needs, then that could be a sign of having imposter syndrome, but also like perfectionism in relationships where we're trying to earn love by doing and not being. Yeah. Oof. That's like powerful. Oh,
I know. Talking about it, I'm like, wow, this is some some deep stuff we're getting into.
That's some deep stuff. And I would love to know, I mean, if you're comfortable sharing or not, like,
yeah, absolutely,
your own journey, I think, with perfectionism. And like, has there ever been a relationship for you where you're like, whoa, I am getting nothing out of this person or nothing out of this relationship, or I'm like over the top doing something more and I'm not receiving something? Like, was there an aha moment? I think for you talked a little bit about college, but where's there like that internal aha moment of I'm chasing something externally and I'm needing something internally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that clarity comes with age, just because the older we get, the busier we are, and the more selective we have to be with, how we use our time and who we spend our time with. So there's one friendship that pops into my head, somebody I was friends with from graduate school, where it was very one-sided, and I felt like I was her therapist, not her friend. And and so at one point I just had to say, like, it's like I had to break up with her, which sounds really drastic, but that's essentially what it was. It was like a friendship breakup.
Yeah. So like a re-evaluation of friendships, but in a boundary way, right? Like, is this relationship fulfilling? Does it feel like an equal push and pull? or balance, I should say, and then having to do the hard work of like being honest with yourself and honest with someone else.
Right. Yeah. And I tend to be somewhat conflict avoidant, so that was a very hard thing to do. But I'm also very introverted, so like I have very little energy to sort of give to others socially. And so I've really had to discover that for myself over the years of like the people that I'm hanging out with, like they need to replenish my energy in some way, not suck it out of me. So
yes, I love that. And I do think there is something with age where you just like can't give a shit anymore.
Yeah.
You know, you're like, I got 2 hours out of my week to like spend time with the people that I want to spend time with. Like you get to kind of be more choosy, or it forces you. I guess parenthood really forces you to be more choosy in that way.
Yeah, certainly.
Oh, yeah, it's so true. What is something that has really shocked you about becoming a therapist? Like what has really surprised you about yourself in your own growth, in your own journey? And where are you really proud of yourself? Sorry, shout it out, girl. Let's hear it.
I mean, the two sort of long-term goals I had were to have my own practice and to teach. And so I feel like just in accomplishing those things, like that's been very rewarding and gratifying for me. And, you know, I feel like even in being a therapist, you're like, even though you're working with whatever the client is bringing to the table, a lot of times you are still learning a lot about yourself, you know? And I think I don't know if you've experienced this, but I know a lot of therapists are really good at, you know, giving, I don't want to say advice because we don't give advice, but, you know, and encouraging people to do things that maybe we don't necessarily do ourselves, and we could, you know, practice what we preach a little bit more. I'm definitely guilty of that at times. So it's like I need to just pay attention to that like I'm showing up authentically. If I'm telling you to do something to help your wellness and your emotional and mental health, like I should be doing that myself.
Yeah. Which is a hard thing to do, I think, as a therapist, because your goal is to only give or provide space or to help someone else. And so in your off time, it's like you're still thinking about those things, but also you're exhausted and, you know, like you're trying to balance that. But there are some things where I'm like, oh, like I did tell my client to do this. I'm going to try that. Or there's something I am doing and I want to tell my client that I'm doing that. And this is what's happened for me. And not that you'll have the same experience, but I know what that journey looks like, or I know how hard that can be, you know, and like really connecting with that. And I don't know what your experience is, but I think the older that I get and the more that I'm in this field, the more I become less of a blank slate. I don't know if you're the same, but I feel like I'm trying to be more authentic to me and how I want to relate or connect to people, right? Which has freed me up in a lot of ways. And I mean, sometimes people call me the girlfriend therapist, which is like, oh, you're like a girlfriend that like, I mean, nobody talks like that, but I like that, you know, like I want to be a good person and a good human. And also I see you 1 hour a week. I don't go out for drinks. Like I'm not crossing boundaries or anything, but this idea of like wanting to show up. So my question for you too is like, how do you show up in the therapy room? Like, who are you? What can people kind of expect when they see you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had several clients tell me it just feels like they're talking to a friend. And if it's appropriate, I will share something that I've experienced. Like if, you know, I've heard of therapists who they don't even provide facial expressions and like will not share anything, any personal details. And then I've heard of therapists who like spend the whole session talking about themselves. So there's a wide spectrum of, I guess, belief systems about this. But I'm in agreement with you. I think just like, you know, we have lives, we have experiences, we have vulnerabilities, and if that's appropriate to share and that's relevant, then I think that can make the sessions more powerful.
Yeah. Yes, totally. I love that you mentioned that, because therapy almost feels like the wild, wild west. Like there's, you know, you have to take a test essentially of like your knowledge, but no one's really testing you like on the crazy scale, you know? So it can be hit or miss, right? Or just personalities. Like I've had plenty of times where, you know, I've had a couple sessions with someone and they're like, hey, it's just not a good fit. And I'm like, absolutely. Thank you so much for letting me know. Please go find your good fit, right? It just is what it is. And so, you know, when you're dealing with humans or in the profession of humans, you have to figure out, well, who am I as a human in that first, and how am I going to be relating to them? So yeah, it's a delicate balance, but done well, I think can be really effective. And that might come with experience too, right? And time.
Yeah, I would say so. I think I was definitely more focused on like technique and sort of directives when I first started out, because they felt safe. Like, okay, this is what I learned in school. This is what I'm supposed to do. But now it's more about I think the flow of the session and, you know, pulling in different things as they're needed, you know, from different theoretical perspectives or little bits of insights or whatever.
Yes, I love that. Okay, I have one last question for you before we end. And I think I'm going to ask everybody this, but this is like such a curiosity question of like, number one, do you end your sessions on time? And do you have a transition sentence that you usually say?
So I laugh because some of my clients had made fun of me for my transition sentence because it's always the same. It is hard. So I always say, well, either, well, we have to wrap up for today, or, you know, I notice we have to wrap up in a minute, and then kind of move into confirming their next session. And then in terms of ending on time, I found it easier to do in virtual sessions because I have the time right there, versus in person where you're kind of like the clock might be, you know, off to the side a little bit more. I have gotten better about ending on time. I feel like the more I guess the more seasoned I've gotten, but I'm definitely still guilty of letting some clients go over time if like it's a pivotal moment, or, you know, if they're I hate interrupting. I hate cutting people off. And so
yes, totally. I love that. Thank you for answering that, because you don't know what it's like in other people's sessions, right? And like, I just feel like it's such a hard transition, and everyone's going to be different in what they're needing or how they're going to receive it. But also we got to end. So there's like this funny, I don't know, like line you have to walk with it. So thank you for sharing that. I'm like going to collect all the therapist data and get here's how real people are doing it and what's working for them and what's not working for them. So
it'd be interesting to do a study on that, because I have some clients who they will not look at the clock the entire session, and like it's on me to shut it down. And then I have other clients, they'll tell me what it's like, oh, it's 1 o'clock, you know, and I'm like, thank you for acknowledging that.
Yes.
So it's so funny.
I think those are the clients that might typically, I'm generalizing here, might be more anxious, because that was me as a therapy client. I was like, well, okay, well, I'm not going to speak because it's like, we got to wrap up here, you know? And like, I'm managing the time, which also speaks a lot of my own therapy and growth that I need to do. But yeah, so I love that. Thank you so much for that.
Do you typically end on time, or do you let people go a little?
I do, but I like I don't stop at like the 50 mark, like the 10 minutes. I'll typically go till the hour or 2 minutes before if I can help it. And then there's some clients that I've been with forever that they're like, all right, and there's some clients again that end at 12, like at the 45 mark with me. And I'm like, okay, you ready? You're done? Like, so it's just this interesting thing, but especially if I have someone next, I'm like, okay, I gotta really go, I can't, I can't keep going. So, I can't even think of my transition sentence because I think it might be different every time. I think it's like a recap. Well, I'm really excited for you. I'm proud of you. I would keep doing this, blah, blah, blah. And I'll see you next week, right? Or are we on next week? That's what I think that's what it is. So,
yeah. And I actually had to stop scheduling clients back to back because I would get so anxious about a session running over. So now I leave at least 15 minutes in between.
Smart.
My clients.
And that's how you take care of your mental health.
Exactly.
Everyone.
Right?
Yes, you move it around. Oh, I love that. Well, awesome, Kristen. Thank you so much for being a part of the How We Get Through podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
Everyone stay tuned for part 2, where Kristen will give us some quick tips on how to deal with imposter syndrome. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening to our show. We hope you feel less alone in your experience with imposter syndrome because we all have it. And if you want to dive deeper, check out Kristen's course, Imposter Syndrome, on the How We Get Through app, which is available for both Android and iPhone. Stay tuned for part 2 as we talk about how perfectionism plays a role. We'll see you then.